Knowing nobody would believe him, the younger man took his cell phone out and filmed the interaction.
Really? What it is, guys? It's your boy BlastphamousHD, aka Tyrone Couple. And even though I watch a whole bunch of Marvel superhero movies, I don't know if I believe in time travel just yet. Seen one UFO, never saw a time machine. With that being said, today we're here to check out the most convincing time traveler story of all time by none other than Be Amazed. Let's do this.
Doesn't it? And with that in mind, let me tell you the remarkable case of Sergei Ponomarenko. April 2006, in the Ukrainian city of Kyiv, a man dressed in an old-timey outfit carrying a retro camera was spotted wandering the streets looking utterly confused. The mysterious stranger stumbled around for a while, seemingly in shock before bumping into a couple of police officers. Nervously, he asked them for directions, only the place he asked about no longer existed. And he followed up with a question that would make their head spin. What year is it? He asked again and again. Growing tired of his incessant ramblings, the policeman arrested the strange man on the spot. Sometime later, our enigmatic gentleman was sat in police custody, being questioned. He identified himself as one Sergei Ponomarenko and claimed he was from the year 1958. What? Obviously, the cops didn't believe him. But then he handed him his ID and things got much weirder. The identification had been issued by the Soviet Union, which Ukraine hadn't been a part of since 1991, 15 years before. But Sergei looked no older than 30, and the birth date on the ID card read 1932. Something was very wrong. Well, according to Sergei, he'd been on a walk with his fiancée, Valentina Kurish, when he noticed a strange bell-shaped object in the sky. Mesmerized, he grabbed his camera and took a snapshot of the erratically flying object. Only immediately after the flash, he found himself transported forward in time to the same spot in 2006.
Oh boy.
And that's when the officers had found him. Well, safe to say, they were having none of it, and Sergei was sent to a psychiatrist for a proper evaluation. Now, his claims definitely sound crazy, but did he have any proof? Well, actually, yeah. Sergei's psychiatrist, Dr. Kuchakov, took his camera and called a photography expert in to see if there really were any photos of this strange bell-shaped object on there. First off, the camera itself was found to be totally authentically vintage. Secondly, the film inside was in near-perfect condition, despite being so old that it couldn't easily be developed with contemporary technology.
Good Lord.
Indeed, it had gone out of production back in 1970. And when the guy did manage to develop the film, he was even more flabbergasted. The photos were indeed of Kyiv in the 1950s. One showed Sergei posing in the same outfit he was arrested in, another with a young woman, and another of, there it was, the infamous bell. Was Sergei telling the truth? Was he really a time traveler? To find out, Kuchakov brought him in for yet another interview. He slid the photos across the table and asked him to explain them. Sergei simply glanced at them and said, "See, I told you so." He went on to say that he had no idea what the strange bell-shaped UFO could have been or what happened to him. He simply reiterated that he took the photo, wound up in the future, and had literally no clue what was going on. Unable to get anything more out of him, the psychiatrist sent Sergei back to his room at the clinic, and well, that was it. He was never seen again. That's right, chucked you a curveball there, didn't I? Sergei was confirmed via CCTV to have returned to his room as normal, but once inside, he completely vanished. Seriously, the door never opened again, yet bars on the window should have made escape impossible. Regardless, when he was next checked up on, he was gone. Man, a time traveler and a magician? What next? Well, now the police had a missing person case on their hands. In an effort to learn more about the mysterious character, they looked up old records from Soviet-era Ukraine. Lo and behold, there had been a Sergei Ponomarenko living in the country at the time, and he'd been declared missing. In 1960 rather than 1958, but the coincidence was still very spooky. At a dead end, but determined to find answers, the officers decided to look up Sergei's supposed fiancée, Valentina Kurish. Some hardcore sleuthing later, they couldn't believe their eyes when they eventually located just such a woman. It was time to pay her a visit. After knocking on the door, they watched with amazement as a 70-year-old woman answered. Could it really be her? She explained that her fiancé Sergei did go missing in 1958, but that he'd returned to her a few days later saying he'd seen into the future. It was her. Apparently, Sergei had become a bit of a local celebrity after his time jump, telling stories of future tech he spied during his trip. But he didn't stick around forever. He vanished again in the 1970s, this time never to return. Following this reveal, Valentina provided the investigators with some new photos, one of which supposedly showed Sergei stood in Kyiv in the year 2050. Check out the skyline. That's way more advanced than it is in present day. Man, this guy sure got around. Was that where he went when he disappeared for good? If so, how did Valentina get hold of the photo? Or did he time travel more than twice? How had he even time traveled in the first place?
What the hell?
Where was he now? He could literally be anywhere, hundreds or even thousands of years into the future.
Where's Waldo?
Oh, my head hurts. So the mystery was never solved, Sergei was never seen again, and the story became legendary. So legendary that it was even featured on a Ukrainian TV show named Aliens, where the events were recreated. That's where that CCTV footage came from. But that leaves us with a question. Where's all the actual evidence? The CCTV footage, the photo of his ID card, the photo of Sergei from 2050, shock horror, they were all just recreations. And not even particularly convincing ones. The CCTV feed displays the date Wednesday, 23rd April 2006, but if you check that date, it was actually a Sunday. The real footage is suspiciously nowhere to be found. As well as this, the ID card has several inaccuracies, and as for that image of Sergei in 2050, well, several of the skyscrapers are just cloned through Photoshop. But hold on, they were only ever supposed to be recreations, right? So this crazy tale could still be true. Technically, yes, but there's a chance the Ukrainian show didn't recreate the events at all and actually just invented the whole affair and presented it as fact. They're not exactly the most reputable source, and any real evidence for the story is yet to show up. It's all smoke and mirrors, and in all honesty though, we just don't know. Maybe we never will. But what do you think? Is this the single most convincing time travel story ever? Or is it just an urban legend blown way out of proportion? Let me know in the comments below. Thought that was the only tale I'd have for you, did ya? Ha! Get a load of this. A wartime wonder. In 1935, a British air marshal named Sir Robert Victor Goddard, and yes, that is a real photo of him this time, was out on a routine flying mission. But it would wind up being anything but routine. See, Goddard was traveling from Scotland back to his home base in Andover, England, and while soaring back home, he flew over a derelict airbase near Drem. This once bustling military station had long ago been converted into farmland and was now overgrown and largely abandoned. While he was glancing at the hangars below, Goddard was shocked to see a storm rolling in out of nowhere. But not just any storm, oh no. These clouds were an otherworldly brown and yellow color with violent winds blowing from within them. In an instant, Goddard lost control of his plane and plummeted down through the clouds. But the faster he careened through them, the deeper he seemed to go. Eventually he emerged, panic and sweating, but very much alive. Managing to wrestle back control of the plane, he found himself face to face once again with the airbase, only this time things were a little different. It wasn't so abandoned. What? In fact, far from the derelict field he'd seen before, there now was a fully functioning airbase bursting with activity and workers assembling strange planes that Goddard had never seen before. The planes were yellow, not the color of RAF planes, and the pilots wore blue overalls rather than the standard issue brown. Where had he gone? When had he gone?
Don't trust that.
Then Goddard was abruptly flung into another tumultuous storm cloud and emerged back at home base. Seemingly everything was normal again. Bewildered and in shock, he told everyone he could about the incredible experience. Years passed and Goddard's story became well known, but why would anybody believe it? Well, by 1939, something wild happened. The airbase near Drem was renovated, and not only was it back in action, but yellow planes and blue overalls became the RAF's norm. Whoa. Everything that Goddard saw came true. So back in 1935, had he briefly jumped forward in time? The pilot himself claims he must have flown through a time slip, which is kind of like a blip in space-time that can send you to another point in history. If that sounds unbelievable, it's because it is, and many people reckon he was either hallucinating or made the whole thing up for attention. But me, I'm not too sure. It's doubtful an RAF pilot would make silly things up like that, let alone one as celebrated and respected as Victor Goddard. A random hallucination seems equally unlikely, and how do you explain what he saw actually coming true? Simple coincidence? Goddard went on to become a firm believer in the paranormal, and he even wound up writing books on the subject. I have to say, whether what he saw was real or not, I do believe he at least thought it was. Now, I can't guarantee I'll be able to help you time travel, but I can guarantee you a good time. Why not drop a like and subscribe to the channel today? That way you'll never miss out on another crazy video just like this one. All done? Awesome. Let's dive back in. The Time Authority. Now, there's been a whole host of people who have claimed to be the very first time traveler captured on film. But this next guy, known under the pseudonym as Dziga Vertov, has actually developed a following of true believers. In a YouTube interview from 2014, he shared his story.
Okay, so how long, just give me a general sense, is your future from now?
I'm from the 30th, but that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm operating a little bit under the radar here because there are plenty of people who don't approve of fraternizing with historic citizens.
By the 30th, he's referring to the century he's from, so around the year 3000. Unfortunately, he doesn't confirm if they live underwater, but goes on to say he concealed his identity during the interview to keep off the radar of an organization called the Time Authority. Now stick with me here. According to Vertov, the Time Authority is incredibly powerful and works to ensure time travelers and ordinary people don't change the set path of history. To achieve this, they can wipe your memory or even trap you in a perpetual cell while a clone is sent out to replace you. Yeesh. So if he can be believed, Vertov risked a lot to do the interview. But why? Well, it wasn't for anything positive, that's for sure. It came with a warning.
Your children and great-grandchildren will certainly see catastrophe.
Ah, nice. Apparently, in the near future, society will collapse and money will cease to exist. However, Vertov also assured us that eventually we'll rebuild and learn how to harness limitless resources. Oh, okay then. The interviewer was understandably skeptical of these claims, especially when our future friend refused to offer any proof. Vertov didn't exactly take this skepticism well though, and stormed off set never to be seen again. Did he jump back into his time machine and decide the past wasn't worth revisiting? We may never know, but you only have to glance at the comments to see how many people are certain he was the genuine article. I'll be honest, I'm skeptical. Without proof, it's hard to believe anything this man said, but then again, would bringing proof have altered the timeline and angered the so-called Time Authority? Perhaps. I'm more interested in why his language and pattern of speech doesn't appear to be any different to ours despite living 10 centuries in the future. Yeah, jury's out on this one. A very long nap. Ever heard a story of a coma patient waking up and being amazed by how much the world has changed? Well, as crazy as it must be to wake up 20 years later, Paul Amadeus Dino can one-up that feat. In 1921, he fell into a coma only to wake up in the year 3906. Holy cow, how's that for time travel? Right, so a little background. Dino was a Swiss teacher born in 1884. He fell madly in love with a woman who ended up leaving him for a rich man, sending him into a deep depression. Then in 1917, he was diagnosed with encephalitis lethargica, the sleeping disease. Man, can this guy catch a break? Because of the disease, he found himself randomly falling unconscious for long periods of time, culminating in the infamous coma of 1921. This time when Dino awoke, he was in a hospital, but one completely unlike the Zurich hospital he'd been comatose in. And the location wasn't the only thing that had changed. He was in a completely different body. Dino found himself inhabiting the form of a physicist named Andreas Northam, who was recovering from an accident. Dino and Northam's body couldn't understand the language that the hospital staff spoke, but could see past events through Northam's memories. Because of this, he learned that he was in the year 3906 and that after our time, violence, poverty, and overpopulation had crippled humanity to the point a catastrophic nuclear war had broken out. But it got better. In the aftermath, our species rebuilt under a new world government, one with true equality and prosperity. Then it got really weird. Strange spiritual entities visited Earth and brought enlightenment to humanity. Humans even learned how to control the chemicals in our bodies. Sounds pretty fantastical, but we are talking almost 2,000 years into the future here. It's safe to say that after centuries of turmoil, the world of 3906 was essentially a utopia. Heck, people only worked for 2 years and then retired. Think of all the free time I'd have to Morse dance. While living in the future, Dino fell in love with a woman who he believed was the reincarnation of his lost love. But it wasn't to last forever. Finally, after a year of utopia, he suddenly awoke back in the year 1922. That must have been a culture shock. Being an intellectual, Dino didn't tell anybody about his experience for fear of being called crazy. So how did we ever find out? Well, after he awoke, he wrote all of his experiences down in a diary, then moved to Greece and started teaching there. While there, he passed on the diary to his favorite student, George Papahatsis, for him to read over. Despite being told never to share the work, however, Papahatsis ended up betraying his teacher and publishing it in 1972. Wow. Whether you agree with his decision or not, we'd never have heard about it otherwise. Which is precisely the problem. Some claim that Papahatsis had actually just written a work of fiction and framed it as fact for publicity. In which case, wait for it, Dino was never real, just a literary device. And sure enough, there are no records of Dino ever actually existing. Indeed, a photo commonly associated with the guy was found to just be a criminal from New Zealand. Pretty sus, right? Others think that Dino did exist and he did have that wild experience, but it wasn't time travel, it was just an incredibly vivid dream. Coma patients have been known to have these larger-than-life dreams, so it's not outside the realm of possibility. But what about the more interesting option? Could Dino have actually seen the world of tomorrow? Did he even exist? I guess there's only one way to find out. Wait and see if his predictions start coming true. We might be waiting a while, though. Future photo. Okay, we might need to be wearing our tinfoil hats for this next one. Back in 2018, a man named Alexander Smith appeared in a handful of videos on the YouTube channel Apex TV, and he had a confession. Can you guess? Alex claimed he was a time traveler. Okay, maybe that wasn't the hardest guess. Supposedly, the CIA had sent him on a top-secret mission back in 1981. When he had to travel through time to the year 2118. What that mission was exactly, he was tight-lipped about. But when he returned, the CIA weren't happy. The traveler claimed he had to go into hiding, and they've been hunting him down ever since.
But I'm living in hiding. They aren't gonna find me. Yes, I did tell my family about the story, but only after I said it on video recording.
Okay, so what do we have to go on here other than his word? Well, Smith produced a photo from his pocket that was apparently a copy of one confiscated from him by the CIA. See, when he was in 2118, he'd snapped the futuristic cityscape. At least that's what he says. That pic is far too blurry to really see anything of note. Regardless, he claimed that he'd been sitting on this evidence since way back in the 80s as he didn't think the world was ready to see it. No idea why he thought 2018 of all years was the right time, but whatever. He went on to urge humanity to deal with climate change, implying he'd seen a future where it ravaged the globe. Wouldn't you want to tell people that as soon as possible rather than hanging around? I don't know though, that photo doesn't look like it depicts a ravaged city. Not that you can tell, of course. Supposedly it's only blurry though because that's what happens when you travel through time. Sure it is, bud. On top of that, the guy does a constantly wavering American accent that I'm wholly unconvinced by.
This picture was the city I walked in. I'll never forget when I took that picture. It was right outside the city.
Yeah, that alongside that weird mask thing he's wearing, and I think it's pretty safe to say old Alexander was just a chancer looking for his 15 minutes of fame. Unless that's just what happens to your face when you travel through time, of course. Sorry, but I just had to include this for the sheer hilarity of it. Buskill Man, away! Sinkhole. If you thought time traveling through your dreams was wacky, buckle your seatbelts. In a 2006 documentary, a Swedish fella named Håkan Nordqvist regaled the world with his own insane time travel experience. Supposedly, one day he'd noticed a leak underneath his sink, so he promptly grabbed his tools and got to work. As he reached in to fix it, however, he was confused to find the back of the sink seemed to move away from him, as if by magic. Further and further he reached until he realized he'd have to crawl under it to get to the leaky spot. So down he went, but suddenly a blinding white light erupted from out of nowhere and rapidly engulfed him. When it faded away, Håkan wasn't in the kitchen anymore. Our guy was now outside and somebody was standing in front of him. Someone he recognized. With a lurch in his stomach, Håkan realized he was staring at himself. Only an older version. This other him was delighted to see his former self, and although young Håkan was incredibly confused, the duo quickly got to chatting. Knowing nobody would believe him, the younger man took his cell phone out and filmed the interaction.
Really?
Yep, they even had matching tattoos. After having the time of his life, though, Håkan had to return to his own time to share his story. And since the documentary first aired, it's been causing a stir on the internet ever since, with many people utterly convinced. Only is everything as it seems? In the doc, he never actually says how he returned. And it seems pretty convenient that the footage we have is just blurry enough that you can't properly make out the future fella's face, doesn't it? True, cell phone cameras were pretty poor back then, but he could have got a better angle. What's more, skeptics were quick to point out that the matching tattoos both look far too fresh. Wouldn't the older man's be more worn? Well, these are all valid questions, because it was eventually revealed that this whole thing was just one big publicity stunt. Oh man. Yep, it was run by insurance company AMF for their pension plans. Because I don't know, nothing sells insurance like time travelers, I guess. Don't worry, I'm confused too. Mysterious messages. You wouldn't have thought it, but back in 1984, a dusty old cottage in the English village of Dawdleston was about to play host to one of the wildest accounts of time travel I've ever heard. Teacher Ken Webster was living there with his girlfriend Debbie and their long-term guest Nicola. They were renovating the property when they noticed some strange six-toed footprints on the floor and walls. Dismissing it as a prank, they ignored the odd footprints, but things got weirder. Inexplicable cold spots started appearing throughout the cottage. The trio noticed strange shadows flickering across the walls, and on several occasions they walked into a room to find tins of cat food stacked neatly in a pyramid. Okay. Doing their best to ignore the strange happenings, they soldiered on, until one day everything changed. Ken was teaching at a local school and managed to get permission to bring a then state-of-the-art computer back with him. Excitedly, he booted it up and was shocked to see strange text appearing on the screen. It was some kind of creepy poem about nightmares and withering flowers, but Ken couldn't make much sense of it. And it didn't stop there. Before long, a second, even weirder message appeared. This one was written in an old dialect and directly accused Webster of stealing the house from them. It was enigmatically signed LW. At first, Ken thought it must have been some kind of prank, but remember, this was 1984, when the internet was supremely primitive and Ken's computer wasn't connected to any network, so it couldn't have been. On a whim, Ken tentatively typed a message to LW back, and incredibly, he got a response. And another. And another. Slowly, surely, LW and Ken got to know each other. LW was actually called Lucas, and he claimed to be living in the 1500s, which explains the dialect, on the same plot of land that Ken's cottage now occupied. It was Lucas that had been causing the weird activity before through some kind of time slip in order to try and get Ken's attention. What's more, Lucas eventually revealed that he'd also been talking to a mysterious third party who claimed to be from the year 2109. Okay, now my head's spinning. This man from the future had apparently traveled to the past and brought Lucas a Limsboisty, which translates to box of lights. Could this be the computer he was using to communicate with Ken? To confuse matters further, Lucas then admitted his real name was actually Thomas and he'd been going under a moniker because the man from 2109 had ordered him to. Jeez, still following? Then give yourself a pat on the back. Eventually, the man from 2109 joined the conversation as well and told Ken that he and Thomas were part of a secret experiment that would change the course of history. Okay. By revealing his real name, however, Thomas had potentially ruined the grand plan. What that plan was, we may never know. In his final correspondence, Thomas told Ken he'd been accused of witchcraft and was being forced from his land. I'd hazard a guess owning a futuristic computer hadn't done him any favors. Regardless, he had the time to thank Ken for his friendship and promised to write a book on the events before stashing it somewhere for him to find later. 2109 confirmed that one day the book would indeed be discovered before vanishing shortly afterwards, never to return. Ugh, that's super creepy and convoluted. But is there any truth to it? The whole thing sounds like a load of baloney, right? Well, the account of events is from Ken himself, who wrote a book about it called The Vertical Plane. Ken definitely profited from this, so there'd certainly be motive to fake it. But upon analyzing the messages from Thomas, English teacher Peter Trender concluded the vocabulary used was authentic to 1540s Cheshire and that they were therefore 100% genuine. Other academics have disagreed with this, pointing out various inconsistencies with the language that may point to it being a hoax. Despite this, we can never truly know, and Ken remains steadfast that many of the messages came through when nobody was in the house to be able to fake them. Thomas's promised book, however, remains unfound. I'm on the fence with this one. I want it to be real, I really do, but until we get some more concrete proof, I'll leave it up to you to decide. And with that,
Me personally, I think the first guy was a time traveler, but after that it just keeps getting more suspect, more cappish. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, so make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe. The comment question of the day is, would you rather your house be haunted by ghosts or infested with flying roaches? Twisms!